All right, strap in, everybody. Today we are going deep, really deep into the Quran, that is.
Oh, sounds intriguing.
It is, it is. Specifically, we're looking at how some scholars are, well, using modern science to kind of back up what they see as miracles in the text.
Ah, the intersection of science and faith. Always a fascinating area.
Totally. And our guide for this deep dive is a YouTube video from Dr. Zaghloul El-Naggar.
Oh, yeah, I've seen some of his work. He really dives into this stuff, doesn't he? Like, head first.
Absolutely. And he doesn't shy away from the big, and I mean big claims.
Oh, really? Like what?
Okay, so he focuses on this one verse in the Quran, 7.54.
Okay, I know that one. Talks about God establishing himself after creation and, the whole day chasing away the night, the cosmic order and all that.
Right, right. But here's where it gets, well, wild. Dr. El-Naggar links this to the idea of the sun rising in the west.
Hold on, the sun rising in the west.
Yeah. And in Islam, that's a major sign of the Day of Judgment, like the final reckoning, the end of the world as we know it.
Yeah. It's a powerful image, definitely. I mean, you see that across a lot of cultures and religions, not just Islam. That reversal of the natural order, sun rising in the wrong place, it carries this sense of, like, upheaval,
Yeah.
finality.
Exactly. And get this, Dr. El-Naggar, he points to like actual scientific observations about the Earth's rotation slowing down to support this.
The Earth's rotation slowing down.
Yeah, he suggests that eventually this slowing could like lead to a full-on reversal, making the sun rise in the west.
Okay, so that's where things get a little tricky, maybe. I mean, we know Earth's rotation is slowing down. That's established.
Right.
But the idea of it completely reversing, like, that's a whole other ballgame. Like, there's not a lot of scientific consensus on that happening.
Yeah, you're right.
It kind of makes you wonder if Dr. El-Naggar might be focusing on, like, a very specific interpretation of the data.
Okay, so maybe a bit of a scientific leap.
Maybe a hop, skip, and a jump.
But what's interesting is that Dr. El-Naggar, he connects this potential cosmic shift with a pretty stark statement. He says that the sun rising in the west is the only sign after which repentance is no longer possible.
Whoa. Okay, so it goes from an interesting scientific theory to a very theological point.
Right.
About divine mercy, like the urgency of making things right before it's too late.
Absolutely. It kind of makes you think, okay, maybe the science is up for debate, but the message, that's crystal clear.
Definitely.
It makes you wonder, what are the implications for how we understand the concept of time in the Quran? Is it linear, cyclical, something else entirely?
That's a great question. It's one that Dr. El-Naggar doesn't, fully address in this video, to be honest. He seems much more focused on making those connections between specific scientific observations and the events described in the Quran.
I see.
But I think by highlighting this idea of the sun rising in the west, he's kind of inadvertently opened the door to some much larger questions about the Quran's view of cosmology and time.
That's a great point. And the thing is, he doesn't stop there. Dr. El-Naggar goes on to discuss evidence that the Earth actually used to rotate much faster in the past.
Oh, wow. Okay. Like how much faster?
Like a day could be just 4 hours long.
What? 4 hours?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Right. He's referencing some pretty fascinating findings from fields like paleontology and geology, by looking at things like ancient tree rings and animal skeletons.
Okay, so there is actual science backing this up.
Right. So scientists have theorized that a day on Earth might have been, much shorter millions of years ago.
Wow. So think about that. Hundreds of sunrises and sunsets every single day.
I know, right? It just boggles the mind. But Dr. El-Naggar, he suggests this would have made Earth uninhabitable for us humans.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, he posits that God, in his mercy, waited for the Earth to slow down before creating us.
It's an intriguing argument. So he's essentially saying that God's creation was a deliberate process.
Yeah.
Gradual, fine-tuned over time to allow for human life.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, how those ancient life forms, the ones that lived when Earth was spinning so fast, how did they actually function?
I know, right?
Can you imagine trying to sleep with a sunrise every few hours?
Talk about messed up sleep schedules. Okay, so we've got this potential cosmic shift tied to scientific evidence about the Earth slowing down and this whole concept of a super fast ancient Earth.
Right.
But it turns out there's actually some debate about how to interpret this specific verse in the Quran.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's not as straightforward as it seems.
Not at all. The latter part of verse 7.54, where it mentions the sun and the moon and the stars are subjected by his command, well, it sparked different interpretations. Wait, so there are multiple ways to read that one line? Like, what are the different takes?
So one interpretation, it links this phrase, about the sun, moon, and stars directly to the part about the sun rising in the west.
Okay, so it's like all part of the same event.
Yeah. It's seen as, during this, major upheaval, the very movement of, everything, the sun, moon, stars, it all becomes subject to God's command.
So, like, a massive cosmic restructuring, with everything in the heavens changing, along with the sun rising in the west.
Exactly. But the other interpretation, it sees that phrase as, like, a separate statement.
Okay.
More about, the ongoing, continuous nature of God's power over the universe.
So it's not really about, like, a one-time event tied to the sun rising in the west.
Right. It's more like, hey, even though the sun, moon, and stars, they follow, predictable paths, ultimately, they're still under God's control at all times.
I see. So in that view, it's more about, like, the constant power of God over all of creation.
Precisely. It's subtle, but it changes the whole focus. One emphasizes God's intervention in a specific moment, of upheaval.
Right.
While the other emphasizes God's continuous dominion over, everything.
That is a big difference. So which way does Dr. Al-Naggar lean? He seems like, a pretty literal guy when it comes to connecting science and the Quran.
He actually expresses a preference for that second reading, the one that separates the sun rising in the west from the subjection of the celestial bodies.
Really? That's surprising. You'd think he'd go for the interpretation that's more closely tied to the, a potential scientific event of Earth's rotation reversing.
It's true. And he doesn't really dive into his reasoning in this video, which is a bit of a shame. I'd be curious to know what leads him to favor that reading.
Yeah, what's the thought process there? It does make you wonder, especially given his emphasis on the scientific evidence for everything else.
Yeah. Perhaps he sees the idea of, celestial bodies being subject to God's command is more of a spiritual truth, or metaphorical. It's not necessarily tied to a specific event, but rather it reflects a broader theological understanding of God's power.
Okay, that makes sense. It keeps the focus on the spiritual message, even if the science around Earth reversing its spin isn't quite solid. So let's pull this all together. We've got this claim that the sun rising in the west, it's a sign of the Day of Judgment, possibly backed up by Earth's slowing rotation.
Right.
Though the idea of a full reversal might be, a bit of a stretch scientifically.
Yeah, and let's not forget the idea that Earth used to spin much faster. It's a fascinating concept that Dr. Al-Naggar uses to suggest a deliberate and gradual creation process, orchestrated by God.
Right. The Earth was like a cosmic washing machine just on spin cycle before it was ready for us humans.
That's a great way to put it. But remember, we also learned that there are different interpretations of this key verse in the Quran, particularly when it comes to God's command over, the celestial bodies.
It's a good reminder that, even within a religious tradition, there can be different perspectives on how to understand these ancient texts. It's not always black and white.
Absolutely. And it underscores the importance of, engaging with these texts critically and thoughtfully, recognizing that our understanding can evolve as we learn more about science, history, the world around us.
Okay, so we've delved deep into Dr. Al-Naggar's interpretation of this specific verse, but it feels like there's a bigger conversation here, right?
Definitely.
He's essentially using scientific findings to back up his understanding of the Quran.
Yeah.
Does that mean science is becoming like a new tool for interpreting religious texts?
That's a really interesting question.
Okay.
On the one hand, Dr. Al-Naggar, he isn't the first to look for scientific validation in religious texts. You know, it's a long-standing tradition in many religions, actually, to try and reconcile faith with, the latest scientific discoveries.
Right, like people are always looking for those points of convergence where science and religion seem to be saying the same thing. But is that really the right approach? I mean, aren't science and religion fundamentally different ways of understanding the world?
That's the crux of the issue, isn't it? Science is about empirical evidence, testable hypotheses, and constantly evolving knowledge. Religion, on the other hand, often deals with matters of faith, morality, spiritual truths, things that, might not be easily verifiable through scientific methods.
So it's not as simple as saying, look, science proves this verse in the Quran is true. It's more nuanced than that, right?
Absolutely. I think what's important is to approach both science and religion with a sense of intellectual humility.
Yeah.
Recognize the limitations of each, but also be open to the possibility that they can inform and enrich each other in unexpected ways.
So it's not about like proving or disproving one with the other. It's about recognizing that they offer different but potentially complementary perspectives on the world.
Exactly. And I think Dr. Al-Naggar, in his own way, is trying to do just that. He's using scientific findings to deepen his own understanding of the Quran and to make it relevant to a modern audience that's, well, increasingly interested in science.
Makes you wonder, though, if this approach could have some unintended consequences. Like, what if people start, cherry picking scientific data to fit their own interpretations of religious texts?
That's a valid concern. It's important to guard against using science to simply confirm, pre-existing beliefs. The real value of engaging with both science and religion, it's to open our minds to new perspectives, to question our assumptions, and to recognize the complexity of the universe, the universe we live in.
So it's less about finding like definitive answers and more about fostering a sense of curiosity and open-mindedness?
Precisely. And with that in mind, I'd love to pose a question to you, our listener. If science continues to uncover evidence that seemingly supports interpretations of religious texts, how might that impact our understanding of the relationship between faith and the natural world?
Wow, that's a thought-provoking question. It really is. Makes you wonder, are we heading towards a future where science and religion are, well, partners instead of always at odds?
It's certainly a possibility. As we continue to learn more and more about the universe, our place in it, we might just find that these scientific discoveries, they actually resonate with spiritual ideas in ways we never even imagined before.
Yeah, it's like science is giving us this whole new language to explore these ancient beliefs. But it's not just about like finding proof for religious ideas, is it?
Right.
Exactly.
It's about expanding our understanding of both, really, of both science and religion. Seeing them as different ways of knowing things, but ways that could maybe work together, complement each other.
So it's not this competition to see who's right. It's more about acknowledging that both have something to offer to the conversation, I mean.
Exactly. And that kind of conversation, it can be really valuable. It pushes us to think harder about, what we assume, what we take for granted, to really question how we interpret things, and to be open to new ideas, even if they're surprising, even if they challenge what we thought we knew.
Yeah. This whole deep dive, it's been kind of mind-blowing, to be honest. We've gone from the Earth spinning way too fast to the end of the world as we know it. From looking at ancient trees to figuring out what these verses in the Quran, what they actually mean.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey. We've looked at scientific observations, religious interpretations, and basically the human search for meaning and in it all, in the universe and our existence.
And that's what the deep dive is all about, really, encouraging you, the listener, to think deeply, to make connections, and to never stop exploring the amazing things, in our world and beyond, in the universe, in our own mind.
I said it better myself.
Yeah.
So as you go about your day, listener, consider this. What if the pursuit of knowledge, whether it's, scientific or spiritual or something else entirely, what if it's ultimately about understanding ourselves, understanding our universe, and how it all fits together?
Yeah.
It's a big question. It really is. But it's worth asking. Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.